Now we can go to Wigan and speak to our next guest, who is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy. So much to talk to you about when it comes to global affairs, but I just want to start off with coronavirus, if I may. The Prime Minister giving an interview to the Sunday Telegraph today, where he has said a national lockdown is like a nuclear deterrent. He doesn't want to have to use it. Do you think that Boris Johnson is right to be so reluctant to consider implementing another national lockdown?
Well, it's right to implement local or national lockdowns if they're needed, but I think he's right to aspire to open up the economy again and get things moving. The trouble is that just saying it doesn't make it so, and what we actually need is a plan. There are great gaping holes in the plan that the Prime Minister announced on Friday. You only have to go down to the local high street to see what the problem is. Some of the shops and restaurants have now opened up, pubs as well, but many people aren't coming out of their houses, they aren't spending again in the economy because they're nervous about what this means, whether there's going to be a second wave, whether the NHS is going to be overwhelmed. And we really do need to get to grips with the test, trace and isolate system, which the government accepts is not still fully functional. Matt Hancock last night suggested that he might now start giving information to public health directors about positive tests. That is long overdue and very welcome, but we also need to see tests back within 24 hours. We need to see far more contacts traced and told to isolate far more quickly, because the government is actually going backwards on that. And we need a mass winter flu vaccination programme as well. There was nothing about that in the government's plans on Friday, and unless people feel confident that there are plans for a second wave, that it's going to be avoided, that the NHS isn't going to be overwhelmed, I just don't think that the economy will get back up and running as quickly as the Prime Minister hopes.
OK, now just to move on to China, you've taken a pretty hardline stance on the UK's relationship with China, saying that there's been a naivety about it over the last decade. But of course, China is a very important trading partner to us, particularly at a time when we're dealing with the economic hits of coronavirus, leaving the European Union. The Sunday Times today reporting that the Chinese firm TikTok no longer basing itself in the UK. There's thousands of jobs tied up there. How concerned are you, and how much should we factor in when thinking about our relationship with China, that all-important economic relationship?
Well, we've got to be in a position first and foremost to safeguard our national security. And whilst Chinese investment is very welcome in the UK, there are serious concerns, which I've been raising actually for 4 years now. I was the Shadow Energy Secretary who raised concerns about the Hinkley Point nuclear power station, that we shouldn't be handing over large chunks of our key infrastructure to Chinese government-backed firms here in the UK. And that's what has prompted the row about Huawei. For several years now, we've been saying to the government, this is a high-risk vendor. 3 consecutive Conservative Prime Ministers have been told by their own security services that this is a high-risk vendor, and yet have done nothing to try and reduce the reliance on this company in our 5G network. It doesn't help Britain's economic prosperity to have failed to safeguard national security. That's got to be the plank on which we base everything else. And the truth is that in relation to Huawei, if we'd acted sooner, if the government had paid heed to the warnings, not just from Labour, but from Conservative backbenchers as well, and from their own security services, then we wouldn't be in a position now where the rollout of 5G is delayed and where the costs have increased because we just didn't have a plan.
OK, important, of course, to say the government has obviously, as you say, reversed its position on Huawei. How concerned are you by some of the human rights issues in China? I'm particularly thinking about the treatment of the Uighurs, the Muslim minority community in detention camps, allegations that women are being forced to be sterilised. How should the UK be responding?
Well, we're appalled by what is emerging out of the Xinjiang province in relation to the Uighurs, and also very concerned about the pattern of behaviour that we're seeing develop from the Chinese government. I should say our quarrel is not with the Chinese people. That relationship is long, deep and important, and those cultural exchanges, medical and scientific research collaborations are incredibly important to Britain and to China and to the rest of the world. But we cannot stand by while we see a pattern of behaviour where freedom, democracy, the rule of law and human rights are abused and do nothing about it at all. Now, the government has started to take steps to address this in the last few weeks. We've seen a gesture made to the BNO passport holders in Hong Kong, which has had a very, very tough reaction from the Chinese government, I think proving why I have been saying, and others for some time, that we were right to say that we need a strategy to deal with China across government. The truth is that for a decade now we've had no strategy at home, no strategy abroad. We haven't been building our own strategic independence in relation to things like 5G and nuclear, so that we've got homegrown alternatives and aren't overly reliant on China. We haven't been building alliances with other democratic nations to make sure that we're not squeezed by China on a world stage. We haven't got the strategic independence that we need, and that absolutely has to change. There is also one very concrete thing that the government could do in relation to helping the Uyghur people at the moment, and that is to freeze the assets of any of the Chinese officials that are involved in those human rights abuses over in China. We've got new legislation now. We've been pushing the government to do that for 2 years. The UK should not be a haven for people who abuse human rights overseas.
OK, another country, of course, that we need a strategic relationship with, or a strategic ambition with, is Russia. Allegations this week that Russia is behind online attempts to steal information on the UK's coronavirus vaccine. Now, you've accused the Conservatives of being naive in their relationship to China previously. Do you think the Labour Party has been naive in its relationship with Russia?
Well, I think we got it wrong on Russia, and I made a feature of this during the Labour leadership campaign because I felt that it really needed to be said. When the Salisbury attacks happened, we prevaricated, we equivocated, we called for dialogue at a moment when chemical weapons had been used on the streets of the UK. And what that did was not only to let an authoritarian regime that has invaded its neighbours, that has interfered in elections across European democratic countries over several years, that has had an appalling record of human rights against its own people, against LGBT people, Muslims and other minorities, and used chemical weapons in the streets of the UK. We didn't just let them off the hook, we also let the Conservative government off the hook, because I believe the Conservatives have been desperately slow to wake up to the threat that is posed by the current Putin administration, and we should have been much quicker to act in relation to that. And by prevaricating about issues like Salisbury, we let the Tories off the hook. I strongly believe that that has to change, and that we have to have a much more strategic approach to Russia. But at the current time, what we've got is a government that on the one hand in the Foreign Office is saying that they're going to take strong steps to freeze the assets of Russian officials who were involved in the murder of Sergei Magnitsky and others. On the other hand, we've got another government department, UK Export Finance, which is underwriting to a huge extent, backed by the British taxpayer, the activities of Putin's state-backed oil and gas company Gazprom. It is the biggest beneficiary of UK export finance currently at the moment. This is a very, very confused approach from the UK government, and we've got to have a review of that finance. We've got to have a more strategic approach in relation to Russia, or we will pay the price.
Pretty clear criticism there, both the previous Labour and Conservative response to Russia. Now, it feels like we're rushing through so many topics here, but there is so much to get through when it comes to world affairs with you, so I wonder if you'll forgive me for that. Now, this week a court ruled that Shamima Begum, who of course is the Bethnal Green schoolgirl who left the United Kingdom to join Islamic State in Syria, has been granted the right to return to the United Kingdom to contest the fact that the government stripped her of her British citizenship. Now, both you and Keir Starmer had previously said that she's entitled to come back to Britain. Do you think that Shamima Begum should come back to Britain?
Well, I think those words were proven right by the court judgment that we saw handed down in the last few days. I don't welcome the prospect of not just Shamima Begum, but many people coming back to Britain who may be a risk to us. You know, we've got a history in the northwest here of terrorist incidents just down the road. The family of Lee Rigby are in Bury. We had a IRA attack in Warrington when I was a child, which we still remember every year. It's heartbreaking, and the impact is enormous. So I don't welcome the prospect of many people now being able to come back to Britain who may pose a risk to us, and the security services say that they do. But the Home Secretary has made a real mess of this. There were two ways to handle it. One would have been to take legal advice and see if there was a basis for denying not just Shamima Begum but many other people who wanted to appeal access to Britain, whether there was a way to give them a fair trial overseas. The other would have been to bring them back to Britain in order to face justice. And what happened was neither. We had a Home Secretary who shot from the hip, who tried to play to the gallery, and as a consequence we now face a real problem. Shamima Begum is coming back to have a trial. She has a right to a fair trial. The courts have determined that. But it sets a precedent, so many other people may now return from overseas, and it's not at all clear that the UK is prepared for that. We could have avoided this mess if the Home Secretary had just taken proper legal advice, observed the rule of law and handled this process properly in the first place.
At the same time, though, because we haven't got too much time left in the interview, but some people listening to you will think that actually, why is Labour effectively siding with Shamima Begum, someone who they would feel gave up her right to British citizenship when she made the decision to join Islamic State?
Well, I don't think that is about siding with somebody who joined Islamic State and sought to harm people in Britain. I think that is about saying that people who take those actions must face justice. And there were two ways that could have happened. The Home Secretary could have taken proper legal advice to see if there was a basis to deny her entry into the UK and dealt with it that way, or he, Sajid Javid at the time, could have brought Shamima Begum back to the UK to face justice through the British justice system, but he did neither. And as a consequence, this case has been dragging on for years, and we're now in a position where it's clear that Shamima Begum is returning to the UK, but it's not at all clear that we're prepared for that or for the precedent that this potentially sets. We should have just handled this properly in order to make sure that justice was done. And we should have been thinking about a strategy to make sure that this doesn't keep repeatedly happening. You know, one of the things that was said at the time was that a 15-year-old from Bethnal Green travelling, making the disastrous choice to travel overseas in order to join ISIS fighters. This has happened too often. And there ought to be a strategy to prevent this from happening.
Thank you for that. Now, later on in the programme, another important story that I'm keen to talk to you about. Later on in the programme, we're going to be talking to the mother of Harry Dunn, who, of course, is the British teenager who was killed in a road traffic accident. The other person involved, Ansa Koulis, then fled to the United States, where she claimed diplomatic immunity. Now, they want the case raised with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo when he's in the UK next week. What practically can the British government do about this awful case, or is there nothing more that they can do?
Well, I think the first thing that would really help the family, who I've met with and admire enormously for their bravery and their stoicism through all of this, is to be honest about what happened. There are real inconsistencies in the account that the Foreign Secretary has given about how Ansa Koulis came to leave the United Kingdom. It's starting to look likely, thanks to the work of Sky News and others who've been investigating this, that she was given the green light to leave by the United Kingdom, wrongly it appears, and the family wasn't informed. So the family need honesty, they deserve that, but they also need a trial, they need a verdict, they need justice for Harry. And when Keir Starmer and I met with the US ambassador to the UK, we raised this case. I think there is a willingness on the part of the US authorities to actually try to resolve this, but we need the UK government to step up and approach this with a level of honesty and transparency that has been completely lacking so far. It's disrespectful to Harry, but it also sends a warning signal to a lot of people around the UK, because if this happened to your child, I mean, I would want to know that the British government was on my side, that it wasn't secretly working with other countries in order to let the person who did it off the hook. This family deserves justice, and we've got to make sure that they get it.
OK, and of course we'll be hearing the government's response to that with Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, later on in the programme as well.